What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. I'm Zach Miller. He is Martin Cook. And today we're talking VFX or special effects or visual effects, whatever you want to call it. But first, we have to thank you all for making last week's Bad Movie podcast our most watched in quite some time. Glad to see you had as much fun watching it as we did recording it. It was nothing but laughs from beginning to end. But as always, let's start off with getting a box office report from Martin.
Yeah, the number one at the box office this week was K-pop Demon Hunters, which is kind of shocking. It made 18 million on the weekend, but shocking considering that it's out on Netflix right now. And so not only is it available for anybody to watch in their homes, but it has now also become Netflix's most watched movie ever, which is really hard to believe and shocking. But the fact that it's available on Netflix and it still made 18 million at the box office just goes to show there's a lot of people out there into both the animation and K-pop these days. Have you watched that, Zach? Have you
No.
watched K-pop Demon Hunters? I actually decided to watch it because I'm like,
Okay.
I got to see what the hell this thing is all about.
Sure,
How is this
sure.
possibly the number one movie of all time on
Yeah,
Netflix?
got to keep your finger on the pulse. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I gotta say, it's actually not bad. Like
Okay.
it's a pretty decent animated, obviously not my style. I don't really know anything about K-pop except that it K-pop sounds exactly like regular pop 15 years ago, like Max Martin produced type stuff. That to me is what K-pop sounds like, but whatever. The story, yeah, not bad. Characters, not bad. So, yeah, all right. I don't know if I would think it was the best thing ever, but I can see how kids would like it. Number two, the big late summer shocker, Weapons still holding strong, another 15 million. It's now over 210 million worldwide, which is pretty crazy in only its third week. Also in its third week, Freakier Friday coming in third, another 9 million. It's at about 116 million worldwide. And just for reference, the Freaky Friday made about 160. So it's still got a bit of to go to make that, but it's doing quite well.
And
Um,
one of the reasons, if anybody goes back to watch our box office draft from this year, the only reason I didn't pick Freakier Friday is because I actually said I didn't think it was going to make $100 million. So that one's on me.
yeah, and neither of us even considered Weapons, which would have been a great choice at number five or even number four on my list. Number four for the weekend, though, Fantastic Four, still at fourth place for like the third weekend in a row. Made another 6 million. It's at about 492 right now, which means it'll almost certainly cross the $500 million mark. So, not a massive blockbuster hit for, that kind of movie, $200 million budget movie these days, but still quite respectable. And Marvel probably has to be fairly happy. And then fifth, The Bad Guys 2, another 5 million on the weekend, and it's been around now for five weekends. It's got 155 million worldwide. So it's done pretty well for a sequel that I wasn't quite sure how people how many people actually wanted a sequel. But
Yeah, so this week we actually have four major wide releases. First up, we have Caught Stealing. It's a Darren Aronofsky joint with an all-star cast, including Austin Butler, Matt Smith, and Zoe Kravitz, among a ton of others. But it looks like a Guy Ritchie movie from the trailers I've seen, so it's a really weird departure for Aronofsky.
yeah, it does not seem like Aronofsky at all from the trailer, but who knows?
But I'm a huge fan of his filmography. Yeah, I was even one of the few people that actually like Mother, so I'll
Hmm,
definitely
okay.
go out and see that. Then we have The Roses, a comedy from the director of Meet the Parents with the writer of Poor Things. That's a weird marriage, but take what you will from that, but it looks pretty damn entertaining. Then we have The Toxic Avenger unrated. Now, this was released 2 years ago, but there's a lot of drama and controversy behind the scenes, which should probably generate more buzz around this movie. It's been called like too gross, too violent, etc., which is only going to draw people out to actually go see it.
You would think.
And then we have Run. Somehow Yue Boll still has a job making movies. And this is especially relevant from when we were talking about his career last week in the Bad Movies podcast. It's a monster horror movie, but we'll see. We'll see how
Yeah, I'm just disappointed it's not another sequel to In the Name of the King.
we need that fourth installment. Otherwise,
Exactly. Come on, I need to know what happens next.
exactly. We need those threads tied up. So, the visual effects studio Industrial Light and Magic just turned 50 years old, which is why we chose this topic for this week. Full disclosure, neither of us are particularly well versed in the technological field, but it's an essential part of visual storytelling. And while it may seem like VFX is a relatively new invention, it dates back to the very dawn of filmmaking. And we'll try to keep this light and not like a Ben Stein type lecture, but we feel like we need to fill in some of the history and details of the evolution of visual effects just for context. So, Martin, you want to start us off in like the 1880s or 1920s, wherever
Sure.
you
Yeah. Well, I mean,
at?
let's start with the basic question: what are special effects or visual effects or whatever? And actually there are slightly different definitions for those, but essentially, it can kind of be broken down into for much of movie history like two different kinds. There's practical effects or optical effects, and practical effects are things like sets and makeup and anything that's because it's also called mechanical effects, things that you move a model of something that could be a practical effect. Optical effect is like camera tricks and things like that. So as you said, this stuff goes back to very early, like before movies were even feature length. There was a guy named Georges Méliès who is a French magician and toy maker, actually, who is probably best known for his film A Trip to the Moon. Here's the poster here, and if anybody's seen the thing with the spaceship stuck in the moon's eye, that's Georges Méliès, and that was from 1902. So we're talking all the way back. He was doing special effects and tricks and everything. And then you've got all the big silent film stars, people like Harry Lloyd. You think about movie Safety Last in 1923, which we did in our Century series, and him hanging off a clock, dangling over a skyscraper. How did he do that? Well, they used something called forced perspective. They would build sets on a top of another building and make it seem, because of how they put the camera, that he was actually dangling off the edge of another building. Or Charlie Chaplin in Modern Times, 1936. There's some scenes. And anybody who's got the same kind of algorithms that I do have probably seen this stuff pop up in their in their social media or media watching, YouTube watching. If you have any kind of algorithm that directs you towards film stuff, but there's a scene where he's rollerblading around and looks like he's going to fall down into a big opening. And how did they do that? Well, they used something called matte painting, where they would actually paint on a window and put it up in front of the camera over certain parts of the lens to provide a different kind of um, to put something there that wasn't real. And then there's a guy named Buster Keaton, who we also talked about back in our Century series, who is just a master of all this kind of stuff. And half of his things were actually just stunts, and half of them were special effects. And sometimes it's unclear which were which because he did a lot of both. You think about other kind of like basically people just use techniques whatever they could. Think about 10 Commandments, 1923. How do you do that? Parting the Red Sea. Well, you pour water in something and then you just reverse the film. It's that simple. But there's all these kinds of things that people just kind of did what they had to do. Um, and then the other thing that we should talk about are filtered lenses and makeup. And that was a guy that named Carl Strauss who really kind of brought that and it could show differently depending on the different filters, and so things would look different on the screen. So for about 50, 60 years, that's all people had. That's kind of what they did. And then after World War II, they started to use something called an optical printer. Now look, as you said, We're not technical experts. I don't fucking understand how an optical printer works exactly. But basically, it allowed filmmakers to re-photograph strips of film so they could put different kinds of images on the same film strip. And so that's basically how you get into compositing film, where you film something in front of a blue screen and green screen. I'm sure everybody's seen that. And then you take that image and put it over top of another image that you filmed. So this is basically where the first kind of 100 years of special effects were, up until about, say, 1977.
All right, so perfect segue to
I
why
chose
we're
that
doing.
year for a reason.
Yeah. Perfect segue into why we're actually doing this podcast, because Industrial Light and Magic is the seminal visual effects studio over the past 50 years, and they just turned 50 this year. Actually, their anniversary was 2 weeks ago, I believe. But
Yeah.
so Industrial Light and Magic was founded by George Lucas in 1975 as a division of Lucasfilm. It was created solely to produce a movie that was considered unproducible at the time, which was, I'll give you a guess, Star Wars. So after Lucas saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, he went to the effects supervisor on that film, but he was busy working on Spielberg's Close Encounters. Not a bad gig, also. But so that guy suggested his apprentice to Lucas, and that apprentice was John Sextra, and he made the original visuals for the X-Wings and the TIE fighters, as well as the powers of the Force on screen. He would go on to win 3 Oscars for his work. Since then, I'm trying to just do the Reader's Digest version of this. Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM, has been the gold standard for visual effects innovation in Hollywood. The accolades and groundbreaking achievements are far too many to name on our little show, but some highlights include the first completely computer generated sequence in a film in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, the first completely the first completely computer generated character called the Stained Glass Man in Young Sherlock Holmes, first use of digital manipulation of historic figures for Forrest Gump. Then we have Casper, Jumanji, Dragonheart, The Mummy, and the first fully computer generated character in a live action film using motion capture. To bring this all back to Star Wars, that character is unfortunately Jar Jar Binks. Can't win them all.
Can't win them all.
But ILM has worked on movies, TV, commercials, you name it. ILM has had their fingerprints on anything any major studio has produced over the last 50 years.
Yeah, like as you mentioned, ILM, you think back to Star Wars, and a lot of the stuff that ILM was doing back in those days was models, and matte painting and things like that. But then, as you've mentioned, the more they went along and the more they had to innovate, or they wanted to innovate to make things happen on screen, it led to a lot of computer graphics. And so CGI is kind of what we think about when we think of special effects these days, because
Yeah.
they've become so ubiquitous in all of film. But the use of computer graphics actually goes all the way back to Hitchcock's Vertigo in 1958. It's just that it wasn't actually in a scene with actors. It wasn't a live action scene. It was just in the opening credit scene. So if anybody
Oh, yeah.
knows
Okay.
the Vertigo, the sort of spiral pattern that was created with a World War II era computer that created these computer graphics and fractal images. But of course, computer graphics, the way we think about now, didn't really start to become widespread and a part of actual scenes
It just
with
one thing.
live action.
I think we did discuss that aspect of it in our Century series as well when we talked about Vertigo,
I think
because
we might have. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was so groundbreaking. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Hmm.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, and so as you say, like it didn't actually start to become part of actual scenes until sort of the 80s and 90s. And we'll you've mentioned a bunch of them already, and we'll talk about some of the films that were really groundbreaking in that vein in a few moments. Now, the first completely computer graphic generated film was, of course, Toy Story in 1995. And, people think about that it's a little differently because it's animated, but it was completely done on computers. It wasn't hand drawn, wasn't old school. Wasn't old school animation at all. So now today, computer graphics is just used for everything. I mean, it's
Mm,
used so much in big budget films that no one company can hope to create all the images required. Even a monster megalith like ILM or Peter Jackson's Weta. They can't hope
mm.
to do everything necessary. And so they have to subcontract down to so many different companies. And that's why, if anybody's ever sat through the credits of a Marvel movie, for instance, waiting for those little extra scenes at the end, you'll see minutes and minutes of computer animators going
Hundreds and
by,
hundreds of people.
just hundreds of them, but they're all broken up into different companies. And that's because they will get a contract, say, for one character or for you're doing the background of this place in this movie, but everything else is done by other people, and that's all subcontract. And then usually there's one big overall company, which often happens to be ILM or another big company like that, that kind of stitches everything together and brings it all together. But that's how ubiquitous it's become. Um, how does CGI work? No, computers. Yeah, we're not technical experts. I'm not getting into that. But it's just more about what it's become and how much fun it can be.
Right. So yeah, after all that shit, I think we need a bit of an early drink break here. Let's segue into the stuff we can actually talk about with knowledge that we didn't just look up over the past couple
Yeah,
days.
it is all really cool though, especially when you
Oh
think
yeah.
about some of those guys back in like the 20s and 30s and just thinking through problems of how to make this work. Okay, I've got to make it seem like, I'm riding a donkey over there when really it's, I'm in the city or something like and they just had to come up with ways to make it work. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, and like the editing where you can actually just do a cut scene and like, oh, the character's here, and then how did they disappear?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just cutting 2 frames of film, and
Yeah.
then they disappear. But I mean, I'm sure audiences were blown away, just like
Yeah,
uh
or even like very simple stuff. Like you've got two frames of that you literally stitch together because you want something that's in the top of your screen, like
oh,
in
Marty's got a visual aid. All right.
yeah, in one of the Buster Keaton ones, for instance, there's somebody going along a bridge, but then there's a gap in the bridge. But two trucks drive underneath, and he's able to drive right across them. So how did he do that? Well, the top of the image was just this bridge and just this guy driving across this
Hmm.
normal bridge, and they stitched it together with the bottom of it, which was the thing with the gap, and they kind of just put it together. And so it's really cool some of that stuff they had to do when they had no computers. But for our drink today, and we will see if this works because I haven't done a test, but we're just gonna do rum and tonic. And the reason why we're doing that is that apparently tonic water, as our own little special effect, glows under black lights. So got some black lights here, and we will see if this actually does the trick or not. So yeah, let me go turn out my lights back there as well. And we will see whether or not this works. So this is a very simple drink, obviously. It's just 2 ounces of rum, 5 ounces of tonic,
And white rum, correct?
a white rum, yeah, which is of course what we want. So what we want so that we'll be able to see it glow if this actually works under the black light. This is our own experimenting from back in the day. We're our own special effects pioneers here. So then a little white rum, and then also it often calls for lemon bitters or a little lemon juice or something. I don't have lemon bitters. I've got orange bitters, so I'm gonna try that instead for just something a little different.
All right, I can say that the tonic is glowing blue, but I don't know. I mean, it's a very, very light blue, so I don't know if it's gonna pop on camera, but
Right.
it does kind of work. It doesn't like all of a sudden go like total fluorescent blue. And I didn't think it would, but
No,
yeah,
no,
it's a
but
pretty cool little effect.
yeah, apparently it's the quinine in the tonic that makes it glow. So, oh yeah. Oh, mine is definitely glowing. You're right. It might not come across on the screen. Let me hold mine up. Oh yeah, mine's really glowing
Oh
on the screen
wow.
now,
Holy
actually.
yeah, yours is like fluorescent. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So there we go.
That's
Our own little
awesome.
special effects.
Might have to do with the strength of the black light here then.
It could be, yeah. So there we go. Let's try this. It should be a very simple drink, but
Yeah, I've never had rum and tonic.
me neither.
Oh
Huh,
hell yeah.
yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, not only is it not bad, I would venture to say it's maybe good.
Yeah, I would actually definitely have that again.
Yeah,
It's interesting. Yeah,
100%.
it's always gin and tonic you think of, but
Yeah.
thought we'd switch it up and try a different drink. Yeah, mine is still even
Whoa.
the
Yeah.
black light's down there. Mine's still glowing quite a bit.
Yeah, yours looks cool as shit.
I've got a black light on either side of me here, but
Oh, okay. Yeah.
all
Yeah, I think
right.
I have a bad bulb.
But as we get back into this, let's turn our proper lights back on,
Bad
maybe.
bulb, bad bulb.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
yeah.
these were some black lights that I'd had in storage for a while, from back from some old Halloween parties I used to have. All right, lights back on for Zach. I'll turn mine back on now once he gets there to a mic. Okay.
And I'm back. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Guess I can turn off my black lights now because they're not doing any good. So there we go. Our own little special effects, glowing
Yeah.
drinks. So there's a trick for anybody wants a party drink that looks fancy under a black light. Use tonic water and then a light liquor.
All right, so yeah, let's get into some fun shit that you and I actually can speak about with us some authority.
Yes.
Um, so we went totally ad nauseum on Spielberg like a month ago. We did
Yeah.
three straight episodes on him. So just want to highlight that Jurassic Park is probably the pinnacle of CGI, and not just because it's well, not because it holds up just today, but it was so groundbreaking in its time, and it just
Yeah.
blew everybody's mind at the time. So yeah, Jurassic Park and making realistic dinosaurs and making everybody convinced that they were actually on screen.
Yeah, and likewise, when we were talking through 1999 movies, we talked about The Matrix, so we don't need to go into detail on that. But I think a lot of people are familiar with sort of the bullet time effect. And basically, what that was, it was actually a very old school special effect that they made new, where you take a bank of cameras and spread them all around, and then from that you can stitch together basically still images into some moving images, and that's how you get that effect that they had in that movie, where it seems like the action in the scene is moving faster than the camera, and you're spinning around slowly, and things are moving quickly through it. Very cool effect. And again, it using an old technique, but made new, and in 1999, also kind of blew people's socks off.
Hmm. And then we have Terminator 2 Judgment Day, uh, done by ILM actually. It's
Mhm.
the first computer generated main character for the T-1000. Obviously the I don't know. I always forget how they say it. It's like semi-polymer alloy. But anyway, he's liquid metal.
Yes. And yeah, just an unbelievable image. And this was probably the first time on screen that we really saw computer CGI used to manipulate human-like figures. I mean,
Mm.
we'd seen it manipulating other things, objects, but to actually do it for a human seemed at the time absolutely groundbreaking, and it really was. And it doesn't look quite as good today in 2025, but it's still not bad, right?
Oh, it
Like
holds up for
it
sure.
still holds up, which is pretty incredible after all that
Yeah.
time. One I'll throw in here that we didn't have on our list that I forgot that I was going to mention, and that's a newer one. And I just want to highlight some of the special effects in Dune and Dune Part Two,
Mm.
the newer one. And the thing that I think makes them so good is that they don't look like effects. Like you compare it to a lot of the recent
Oh.
Marvel and big budget and things like that, and it really looks lived in. And that's kind of almost going back to the original Star Wars, where one thing that Lucas really wanted from his effects and his models and everything else was that he wanted it to have a lived in feel. He wanted the
Mm.
world to feel like it had history. And I think you get that a lot with Dune as well. It seems almost seamless that what we're seeing on screen isn't an effect. It's just actually what's happening in this world. But you've got another one next up.
Yes, I do. The next one is Pirates of the Caribbean, the second one, Dead Man's Chest. While I think the first Pirates is a vastly superior movie, the CGI in that one and the CGI in the second one is the second one wins and it's unmatched. And that's basically because and this is another ILM joint. It developed the IMOCAP system, which tracks performers on set and superimposes like the digital tentacles for the David Jones character, which was, I mean, if you go back and look at it, and this was in 2005 or so, yeah, 2005, just flawless and absolutely holds up.
Next one I want to mention is Twister, and not Twisters from 2 years ago, but the original from back in the 90s. Because if you think about it, and for anybody who went and rewatched it before the one last summer came out, it still stands up. And
Hmm.
it was pretty incredible at the time that they could manipulate and mimic a a weather phenomenon quite like that. And they did it using a number of different techniques, right? They used movable sets. So basically, instead of when people are flying sideways, they were actually vertical, and then but the camera itself was attached to that same set. So it seemed like they were being blown sideways. And then they had massive fans and everything. But then to create the tornadoes, some of that was a combination of some of the wind machines along with CGI. And they stitched it all together, I think, in just incredible fashion to make a very realistic seeming tornado and weather effect that when I saw the new one last year, is it last year or the year before? I've already losing time's lost all meaning. Um, yeah, I sort of thought to myself, it looks good. It doesn't look that much different than the
Mm.
original. And I
Yeah.
think that isn't that isn't a negative against the new one. It's really a positive against the original that they did such a good job that it didn't need to be improved upon that much.
Sure, yeah. And yeah, it's come a long way since they were using pantyhose to make Twister or the Wizard of Oz back in 1939. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
another
and
one,
just spinning it around on stage with these kind of nylon sheets and wheels underneath the bottom on a soundstage. It's that is getting back to the practical versus optical effects. That is a epitome of a practical effect.
mhm.
You're creating a tornado and you're doing it with a thing that's on a stage and material.
Then we have the Jungle Book from 2016, the live action remake, and really made realistic talking animals, especially when interacting with live action characters, that hasn't really been replicated especially since like we've had other Disney fare like The Lion King and Mufasa that still kind of looks a little janky here and there, but I don't know, for some reason Jungle Book was they just nailed it.
Yeah. Well, and I think an early precursor to that is in the 80s, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which again was ILM taking the helm of that one. But this one's a little different because it wasn't computer graphics. It was still a little before that, but it was animated characters interacting with human characters, but it was entirely done with illustrators. And that's
Mm,
pretty incredible when you think about it.
yeah.
And you go back and you look at clips of some of those scenes, and not only are the animated characters interacting with the humans, with Bob Hoskins and some of the other characters, but they're interacting with the things in the scene somehow. You know, there's a scene where they're in a big bar or a big club, and they're playing piano. And the piano bench is swaying back and forth as the animated character is playing and moving around. Or you see other scenes where they're moving through uh, different scenes where the light is changing and the shadows are changing, and you see those
Oh,
shadows
yeah.
changing on the humans, but they're also changing and affecting the animated characters as well, Roger Rabbit and some of the other characters. So it's just for its time, it was groundbreaking. And you go back and look at it, and yeah, it doesn't necessarily look like they're interacting with this character today in 2025, but you can't help but be impressed by just the detail they went into to make that all pop and make it all come to life.
Yeah, and as famous as that movie is, I still think it's one of the most underrated movies of all time. Not just for
Mm,
its technical achievements, but because it's so the adult humor in it. And I don't want to.
yeah.
We're talking about VFX here, but yeah, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a terrific movie.
Yeah, go back and watch it if anybody hasn't.
So then our only TV entry in here is House of the Dragon. And I chose this one just to kind of illustrate how far TV has come, especially over the past 20, 30 years. I mean, if you go watch a single episode of House of the Dragon, it's the visual effects are better than any movie in the aughts or the 2010s. Especially the dragon riding, which is a major
Yes.
flaw in Game of Thrones. Like that was one they really had to kind of overcome and use sparingly. But yeah, everybody's riding dragons in House of the Dragon, and it looks realistic as far as as far as dragons go, at least. But
Well, they look like all the dragons I've seen in real life. So,
oh yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, they have a lot of those up in Canada.
No, I mean it speaks to obviously budgets change, and famously in Game of Thrones they kind of had to pick and choose. They could basically either have a dragon or they could have a dire wolf based upon their budget in a particular scene or a particular episode. But it's also kind of the exponential growth of some of the special effects and just how much better they've gotten at doing these dragons. As you say, the dragon riding, just the fact that the dragons all have very unique kind of personalities and
Yeah,
images,
yeah.
and that, yeah, I mean, the three dragons in Game of Thrones didn't really have much of that. I mean, Drogon was a little bigger and darker, but that's about it. But the improvement in just the last sort of 10 years on that kind of stuff is really incredible as well. And then the other one, that the last one that I want to talk about just in terms of uh, really stand out special effects is Lord of the Rings and the whole series. Now, this did a bunch of different things. It combined a bunch of practical effects, a bunch of optical effects, computer graphics effects. So you've got things like, okay, well, how did they do the Hobbits? Well, a lot of that was going way back to old school forced perspective stuff, like we talked about with Harry Lloyd. It was, you have the hobbits in one part and the other characters another part in the scene to make it seem like it, the bigger characters in the foreground, so it makes it seem like the hobbits are smaller. And then the other big thing for Lord of the Rings. And I should say it was also groundbreaking because it was the first time that ILM's hegemony was basically challenged.
Oh,
Because
yeah, yeah, good
for
point. Yeah,
years they, as you said, they were the big special effects studio. And Peter Jackson had a lot of things he wanted to do in this, and ILM was busy with other things and couldn't necessarily give him what he wanted. And so he decided to start his own studio, which was Weta. And the other big thing that came out of this was the incredible development of motion capture through the character of Gollum.
sure.
And that was unbelievable in this film, and then it's just been getting better and better. And obviously, Andy Serkis, who played Gollum in this, has become sort of the king of motion capture. And so I guess I put Lord of the Rings here, but I also wanted to spin off and talk about a little bit the new Planet of the Apes ones, which are just incredible examples of motion capture and just how realistic it can seem, because you're mirroring, sorry, not mirroring, but you're merging the work that actors do to create emotion and use their facial expressions on top of special effects to create characters that couldn't exist. And it's a really incredible development over the last 25 years, and one that it's just getting better and better all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course we're honoring ILM here because it's their 50th anniversary, but the influence that Weta has had over the past 25 years is cannot be overstated. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, Lord of the Rings in 2001 through 2004, like everything comes together in a perfect vortex. It's like the perfect meeting between the practical and the CGI,
Yeah.
where like practical, it's been practiced for like 100 years at that point, and then the CGI has just reached that point where it looks super realistic, and Peter Jackson found a way to meld those two in a way that just totally immersed us in the world of Middle Earth. And yeah, it was, yeah, amazing. Amazing achievement
Yeah,
visually.
yeah, it really was. Yeah, and I've been a huge Lord of the Rings fan forever, and long before, like, I was reading them back in high school, and for years I dreamed of seeing them on the big screen, but wasn't quite sure how that would ever happen. And he uh, probably surpassed all my expectations when I first saw those movies. So very excited as a kid.
But of course, with all the good shit, there's going to be some really bad there's going to be really bad stuff. So now let's
Like
get
Jar
into
Jar, they can't all be winners.
yes. So let's get into some of the worst VFX efforts over the course of CGI. Let's start out with cats. Uh, Besides just being a god awful disaster of a movie as a whole, turning the likes of Taylor Swift and James Corden into digital slash live action hybrid cats was the like uncanny valley incarnate. It was just completely
And Dame
god.
Judy Dench, why you got to do Dame Judy like that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's definitely infamous for a number of reasons. Also, the fact that the story doesn't make sense. Well, there is no real story in that movie, but the special effects definitely just freak everybody the fuck out, and that's not a good thing when you special effects. You want special effects to be as seamless as possible, which kind of takes me into my next one, which is Ant-Man Quantummania. Now, you might think that this doesn't really belong on the list because objectively, the special effects kind of look pretty good. They're actually pretty well done. My problem with this movie is that there's no context. In this movie, you're talking about Ant-Man, you're talking about things that are like sizes, and he can shrink, he can get bigger, everything like that. But unless you've got, and this is what the people who mastered practical special effects and optical illusion special effects back in the day understood, you need a some sort of point of reference. And this movie takes place, most of this movie takes place inside this world in this quantum world that's so small, and the entire world is CGI. And at some point, you just entirely lose sight of what your reference point is. Like, I don't know what's supposed to be big within this small world. I don't know what's supposed to be small. I don't and for a movie and a character that is predicated on shrinking and size being important,
Mm.
it just totally lost any sort of perspective because they made the entire thing CGI and there was no
Ah,
reference point. And so that I think is a perfect example of using good, like objectively decent special effects very, very badly and it ending up hurting your story.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. Get into another comic book movie, Justice League. The main villain, Darkseid, looks horrible, but
Oh,
Henry Cavill's infamous digitally removed mustache still haunts DC fans to this day. And I can even parlay that into the basically the death knell of the Snyderverse slash the old DC universe, which was the Flash, and that was just horrifically eviscerated by all the Flash sequences with they were trying to bring back like Christopher Reeve and all these other characters that weren't actually in the movie, and yeah, it just fell completely flat.
yeah. And the Nick Cage Superman that never was. Um, but another movie that, maybe doesn't belong on this list because maybe we shouldn't have expected it to be good. Um, and it's another kids one, and it's a movie called The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lava Girl 3D. Now, the reason why I included this is because it's directed by Robert Rodriguez, who, he's a big enough director, he should know better. And some kids still love this movie, but if anybody's been forced to sit and watch this with kids, the special effects are just so jarringly bad. None of it looks like you're looking at anything real. That the characters, but the suits they're wearing don't seem like they're even part of their bodies. It's just so horrible that this definitely has to be included, in my opinion, on any special effects gone wrong list.
The next up, we have the Lawnmower Man. I don't even know how many people remember this movie at this point. It's not one of Pierce Brosnan's best, and we'll address one of his other ones in just a few minutes. Little
Spoiler
teaser,
alert, yeah, for
little
Pierce
teaser there.
Brosnan.
But the really bad part is when the main character plugs himself into the internet and the VFX turns into like a really bad video game. And yeah, not much else to say there. It's just if you just YouTube Lawnmower Man bad CGI, it's yeah, really bad.
So, speaking of video game, I'm probably remiss that I didn't mention when I was talking about the growth of CGI. Probably remiss that I didn't mention Tron, which was
Mm.
one of the first movies that really used CGI in a way that kind of brought the world to life and is obviously kind of a cult classic and famous to this day and has another sequel coming out in part because it was so different at the time. But
Hmm.
anyway, that's a little bit of a digression. I probably should have mentioned Tron, but you were talking about uh, getting into computer games, and that obviously sparks that as the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about movies.
And then The Mummy Returns. And while I love the Mummy with Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and co, uh, this one it's still good, but this all comes down to one scene, and that is the Rock. Some of you may know him as Dwayne Johnson, but I will always call him the Rock. It's The Rock's feature film debut as a man slash scorpion CGI hybrid that looks like a N64 character. Um, and they didn't have any excuse for this one. It was 2001, and the tech totally existed to generate a more convincing character. Anyway, The Rock, as last I checked, is doing just fine for himself. So,
It is actually amazing considering how bad that scene is that you're talking about, that this didn't sink his career.
mm,
Like this was a big leap. And wrestlers didn't make successful leaps to feature films back then, unlike now. And this at the time was a big gamble kind of for them to put The Rock in a big budget movie like this. And that scene was so bad that it is kind of shocking that he managed to overcome it. I guess basically he just didn't get the blame. But it is it is the thing of nightmares. It is so horrendous looking. All right. But you had mentioned Pierce Brosnan earlier. Another thing that they always hurt the ones you love. I'm a big fan of James Bond, as people who listen to this podcast know. And so it's with a little bit of hesitation that I have to put a James Bond movie on this list, and that's Die Another Day. And that is for one scene in particular where James Bond, played by Pierce Brosnan in Die Another Day, is parasurfing a tsunami, I
Mm.
guess, and it just looks horrible. Like, not a bit of it is believable. Not a bit of it looks like it's actually happening on anything but a computer screen. It is just one of the worst scenes in all of James Bond history. And, James Bond has always had to do special effects, most of them back in the day, in the early days, practical effects. But this was by far the worst special effect, I think, in James Bond history.
Yeah, and this one was full of that from the opening surfing sequence when he's uh like trying to bust into North Korea, I think it is. And
There's all the weird surfing stuff in this.
yeah, but,
Yeah,
yeah. This is one much like Batman and Robin that we talked about last week that killed the franchise, and
yeah.
they needed to reboot and get a lot more grounded, and we came with with the Daniel Craig version.
Yeah, because
So
this was also the one that had the invisible car. Uh,
yeah,
so yeah, they just lean way too heavily into special effects, CGI special effects in this movie.
yeah, and in some ways it's not their fault because they kept ramping it up, like with the gadgets and everything, and like this is like the logical conclusion of.
Yeah,
I mean, at least Halle Berry was in it, but yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, strictly talking about VFX, yeah, awful, awful, awful.
But you're right. At some point, some of these franchises feel like they've got to outdo each other. It's the special effect equivalent of Fast and Furious going to fucking space. Like at some
Yes.
point, it's just you just try to outdo yourself, and you just end up being even more ridiculous than is believable.
And the last one we're gonna do of the bad ones, I thought would bring it full circle back to Star Wars, the
Yeah.
re-release in 1997. Um, and I took a note when you were talking about Star Wars in the beginning of this podcast, um, with its lived-in feel, and the
Mm,
remaster loses its
yeah,
lived-in feel. So George Lucas is totally contradicting his original vision. And
absolutely. Yep.
specifically injecting a poorly rendered Jabba the Hutt into A New Hope and the weird singing blue chick in the bar,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
which
That kind of pops out of the screen or almost or something. Yeah.
which
Very weird additions.
if you're a fan of the band Lawrence, which Martin turned me on to, like, there's a fun little inside thing where Gracie from the band sings like her, but other than that, there's no point in this.
Yeah, it's true. It did give us Lawrence's version of that song, which is great. But yeah, it kind of ruined the originals. And he was just playing around way too much. I mean, I guess that's
Yeah,
what happens with some of these guys once they get their toys. Because even the prequels, you look at some of the scenes in the prequels,
Jar
and
Jar. Yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, not only Jar Jar himself, but some of the backgrounds. I mean, in
Oh,
the in the
yeah.
original Star Wars, they famously shot in Tunisia, and so they've got these great sand vistas and stuff like that. In the prequels, in the battle scene on Naboo, for instance, you could be mistaken for thinking that what you're looking at was the like Windows 98 background, right? In some of those scenes.
Yeah.
Like it was just so bad and just so bland that it's just really unfortunate that I guess this what I'm saying, and this maybe sort of encapsulates everything. The best special effects have been born out of necessity. It's
Sure. Oh yeah,
when
great point. Great
they
point.
really want to show something and they have to figure out a way to show that on screen.
Yeah.
Whereas the worst special effects are where they're like, oh, I want to try this cool special effect
Just because you can.
just because you can and you're
Yeah.
playing with a toy. And so I think that, thesis statement, this is how I want to sum up my point on this podcast is yeah, for any filmmaker out there, use special effects when you need to, not when you want to.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. But all this may be obliterated because, as we all know, AI is on the horizon, which is going to take everybody's job,
Yeah.
no matter what field you're in. So, is this, but as far as just film goes, is AI a boon or is it the doom of filmmaking?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it's certainly a doom for filmmakers. I mean, you think about all the animators that got pushed out, but then people became computer graphics animators. But AI now, you can type in a few prompts and it'll spit out in 5 minutes what it would have taken somebody a week to produce previously. So, in terms of the careers of people who worked in this field, it's certainly a doom. In terms of the filmmaking, it's hard to say, right? Like some of the stuff looks incredible now, looks very lifelike, but there's still some just glaring obvious errors. I mean, it can't do hands right. It doesn't do text very well if there's a sign in the background, things like that. But we know these things improve at an exponential rate.
Oh, I
It's
know.
gonna get good. It's gonna look very good. And for creatives, if you have this tool, maybe for some films, it will help, but I think we're losing something,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And we think back to like what you said about Lord of the Rings, that it was at this perfect moment where they're using both the practical effects and he's merging the CGI and the stop motion and everything, and how incredibly he brought that story to the screen. If everything is just CGI, if everything has this kind of artificial sheen, I think sadly we are going to lose something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I think we're gonna like spiral out of control into AI, and then if they don't become fully self-aware and kill us all, I
Going
think
back to T2, yes.
I think after about 5 years of that, there might be a pushback. Like we want more realistic kind of stuff, and
I
like
hope
a
so.
pushback because the pendulum tends to swing back and forth, and yeah, yeah. So if they don't come, yeah, they don't come for us all and just make us their you know uh harvest slaves, then yeah, I think it's gonna get worse before it gets better, but I
I
do
agree.
think
Yeah.
I am optimistic that eventually the human mind will win out, but that's probably just me being naive. What are you
Yeah,
gonna
we'll see. Yeah, and we didn't
do?
even discuss James Cameron much, which is funny because he's been more into technology and filmmaking and special effects than almost anybody. And yet he's the one who warned us all about the dangers of this way
Yeah,
back in the day.
yeah, 100%. Well, we hope you enjoyed our dive into visual effects. It was a bit academic, but hopefully you found it fun and informative as we did. Next week is our summer wrap up where we put the summer blockbuster season to bed and we will crown the 2025 summer blockbuster champion of the universe.
Boo.
I'm Zach Miller. He's Martin Cook, and we'll see you next week on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast.
Bye, everybody.